But today, a new age begins. Under me. No longer will we be hunted as the demons who broke Middle-earth, but rather worshipped as the saviors who finally healed it. Doubt me at your peril.
Lord of the Rings of Power returns to its... Okay, this is not working, guys. My voice has been gone for 2 weeks now, so to get this video done, I'll have to bring back him to fill in. Some of you might remember him.
What's up, guys? It's Movie Mento time. After so many years, I'm back. This is my channel again.
No, you just read the script or you're gone.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, Lord of the Rings of Power returns to its second season with one primary objective: to be better than its HBO counterpart, which should be more than possible, since this time the counterpart wasn't very good. Of course, Rings of Power Season 2 is still ongoing, so the full extent of its quality remains to be seen. But that being said, the most important question is, does the beginning of Season 2 fix the biggest problems from the beginning of Season 1? And since this is 2024 Hollywood, the answer naturally is...
no.
See, a couple years ago I made a video comparing the beginnings of Rings of Power and House of the Dragon. Or Filmento did. I was occupied.
Just pretend you're me when you're reading, I guess.
Ah, okay.
A video in which I talked about the non-human quality of Rings of Power that made it very difficult for non-fantasy fans to get into.
Okay.
Me, for example, I didn't bother watching the full first season until over a year later, and even then, only because it's Lord of the Rings. And now that the show is back with Season 2, would you look at that? The exact same f***ing beginning problems are back. There's no human angle into the story, so it's tough to get invested in it. There's no personally motivated conflict in relationships, so it's tough to be entertained by them. And there's also a preference to follow arbitrary fantasy logic over basic human logic, so most of the show feels dumb as hell. And to borrow the words of a wise man, what the f*** were they thinking? One of the most criticized seasons of television in the history of television, and they learned nothing.
Oh, do it again.
It's embarrassing. It's infuriating to have all the core problems served on a platter and then to not even bother trying to address them. Because the thing is, this show should be amazing. It's a fascinating world with endless possibilities, and it looks way better than in TV should be financially feasible. What the hell are you talking about? This show is terrible. There's literally nothing good about it.
Just keep going.
But again, the problem is that it's very tough to get into this world or anything or anyone in it because it lacks the human factor to hook viewers in. The factor that hooked everyone into the rivaling fantasy shows. So today, let's see how the early Season 2 of Rings of Power stumbles into the same problems as Season 1, so that we can avoid them in our own fantasy work. And then at the end, we'll also talk about the show more generally and whether this time we'll be watching more. Some of you might not like what will be said here today, but unless these core inhuman fantasy problems are fixed, this show cannot and will not survive.
I am your only future, and my path, your only path.
The first core fantasy problem here is that there's no human angle into the story, which makes it tough to invest in the story. A good example is the opening flashback sequence. While this time there is no 17-minute voiceover exposition about an evil cloud attacking a tree to begin a war, thank God, there is something similar. Basically, Sauron wants the orcs to serve him after they lost the war, and then he's betrayed by this other guy, as well as everybody else. And as Sauron finally dies, his body activates a dead man's switch that releases an ice age over the land and also vaporizes his body.
He's dead!
But then it turns out that Sauron is not dead. His blood dripped down to this pool from which he emerges as venom. Then he absorbs some rats to become bigger and plops outside and absorbs a woman to become a man. And then he meets some villagers and goes with them on a ship that gets destroyed by a sea serpent. My back! And then he meets Galadriel to begin the events of the first season. That's the big 20-minute Sauron story hook, taking us into Rings of Power Season 2. And before saying anything, let's just roll the clip from the last video.
No offense, but it sounds like some commie gobbledygook.
You got me, Norm.
I mean, I've never heard
The issue with this opening is that it bases the story fully on fantasy concept elements that most non-fantasy audiences will only be confused by. Why does Sauron release an ice age when he dies? Why does he become Venom? Why does he turn into a man when he eats a woman? Why didn't he turn into a rat when he ate a rat? But nitpicking aside, my point once again is that there's no humanly relatable or even understandable purpose in the story to invest in the story for. I have no idea why Sauron wants to rule Middle-earth, or why the orcs doubt him, or why this guy betrays him. All I know for sure is that Sauron is an evil guy, betrayed by other evil guys, and that he goes on a journey to make those betrayers serve him to fulfill his plan. And I genuinely couldn't care less whether he does it or not. I have no human reason to follow this story. All I have is random circumstance and fantasy. Oh look, Sauron is Venom now. Very mysterious and cool. You should watch more. And this same issue poisons the beginning of all the storylines. Galadriel's journey begins with her returning to the Elf King with the Rings of Power that they made at the end of the first season. After which there's arguments over whether or not to use the rings to stop Sauron.
We dare not use them, High King. He's no doubt corrupted
He never
them.
touched them,
He
High
worked
King.
with Celebrimbor.
But what is all this arguing ultimately for? Where's the human side of it, like Galadriel's bond with her dead brother slain by Sauron? How did that happen and how does it still affect her? Why should I care about Galadriel using or not using the rings to stop Sauron? I don't know. Whatever. They're elves, and they have these magic rings, and Sauron wants to make more rings, and so they have to use the rings to stop him, because he's Sauron, and he must be stopped. Watch more to find out. The Frodo people storyline continues with Frodat and the wizard who fell from space as they look for something in the desert. But what are they looking for, and why? I don't know. Some magical staff that the wizard has dreams about?
You had that dream again last night, didn't you?
Which they must find before they're caught by some masked villain who turns into butterflies. Watch more to find out. The dwarf storyline begins with the dwarf kingdom losing light in an earthquake. And when even magical singing doesn't help, they have to go dig a hole, I guess? It's probably the easiest storyline to get into because there's also some family stuff, but it still isn't very interesting because the characters are boring. I still don't feel a big need to watch more to find out. And by the way, I didn't think this was easy to get into at all. I thought it sucked, like everything else.
Okay, but we don't really need to know that. Keep going. You're actually doing pretty well.
The point is that in TV, you should quickly and clearly establish the human purpose of the story that the audience will want to follow the story for. A princess wants to be seen by her father, the king, who is distant from her. And when her mom dies, she gets crowned as the sick king's only heir, despite many others not being fans of the idea.
This is bullshit! This game is a scam!
It's a humanly understandable and interesting hook into this fantasy world. And if that human hook into the fantasy world is not there quick enough, most human viewers will struggle to get into it.
If you tell me what it is you keep seeing, maybe I could puzzle it out. What we're going to find.
No.
For instance, let's say there's a cyberpunk world where a giant corporation uses technology to control its citizens. And then the hero goes on a journey to fight the corporation because it's an evil corporation. That world alone is not enough. You need more detail and heart. Even the biggest concepts need a human angle into them. Like, okay, the hero has a sick dad, and he needs medicine from the internet for him. But the corporation is monitoring his activity, limiting his access to certain content, raising prices based on his region. And so, the story is about the hero coding a special program to fight back on those restrictions for his dad. It's a fictional world, yet still humanly understandable. Because all of us have similar restrictions, as well as a program to fight back with. It's NordVPN, the fastest and most reliable VPN that lets you change your IP address to anywhere in the world with a simple click. Wait, what's going on here? Want to access all geo-locked content no matter where you are? Done. Want to remain anonymous online without letting anyone see what you do? Done. Want to get the cheapest region prices and also automatically stay safe from all malware? Done.
The feeling never gets old.
Right now, you can use the link below to get NordVPN's 2-year plan with 4 extra months for free. You also get a 30-day money-back guarantee and help out the channel. So if you live in our world and don't already have a VPN...
Why not?
Hold on. Was that an ad? You made me read an ad?
Yeah, that money is what keeps the channel going.
Money? Ah. Guys, try out the VPN. It's actually really good in today's world, and you do need a VPN. What's my cut of the money, by the way?
Nothing.
Nothing? The second core fantasy problem here is that the conflict is built more on the fantasy than on conflicted personal motivations, which makes most of the show not very entertaining. Between heroes, for example, there doesn't seem to be much conflict or strong differing agendas at all. When Fredette and the wizard and the other girl are in the desert, there's no opposition between them. They don't get into arguments over which way to go or who gets more food and water. There's no divide of any kind.
Sam! He's trying to trick us!
Nope, despite their dire situation, they're all good friends, always pulling together. Their biggest disagreement is when Fredette tells the wizard to use his powers to get them food, and he's like, no, because it's dangerous.
Oh no.
But then he's like, okay, and then nothing bad happens. Whenever these characters interact, it's guaranteed boring as hell. As for Galadriel's journey, it's a bit better because at least there is disagreement. While she and the Elf King want to use the rings against Sauron, her friend doesn't, because he fears that Sauron had corrupted the rings, and he's willing to take them on the run. But the issue is that even though we dive off a cliff, what we don't dive deep enough into is the personal agendas creating the disagreement. Why does the Elf King want to use the rings? Well, because he's the good Elf King who wants to vanquish darkness. Why does the friend not want to use the rings? Does he have an ulterior motive, or is he guided by a tragic personal experience with Sauron? Well, no. It's because he's a smart elf who knows that Sauron deceived Galadriel, so he wants to play it safe. The conflict isn't personal enough to feel significant. I doubt that the elves will do anything drastic to get the rings back, or that the friend will do anything drastic to keep the rings. And sure enough, he soon gives them to another guy who gives them to the king, and that's that.
Is that it? I think so.
Whenever these characters interact, it's mostly boring as hell. As for the dwarf storyline, it's kind of the same. There is family drama and the tragedy of the kingdom losing light, which puts all characters in an unstable emotional state. But again, the issue is that the conflict isn't very personal or deep. The king won't speak to his son just because he's stubborn.
It was he who caused offense.
The son won't speak to the king just because he's stubborn.
I was right.
And the wife constantly bickers about it. It doesn't really go beyond that. I don't believe that these relationships won't be easily repaired. I don't feel the impact of food being scarce, and I don't think the light going out will be that big of a deal. I'm sure the dwarves can dig another hole just fine. Whenever these characters interact, it's not always boring, but it is pretty shallow and annoying. The hero side out of the way, I'm not saying there is no strong conflict in the show. There is. There is?
Yeah, don't stop.
It can be very entertaining to see Sauron become an orc prisoner to further his plan. It can be somewhat entertaining to see Fredette's group being hunted by masked warriors to the point where the wizard loses control. Emphasis on the word somewhat.
Sure, somewhat entertaining.
But even these external conflicts are average at best, because they focus more on the fantasy elements within them than the people behind them. I have no idea why I should find this Sauron interesting. I have no idea why I should find his rivalry with the betrayer guy interesting. Why did the guy even betray Sauron? Was he jealous of him? Did he not trust him? Did something happen between them? I don't know. I guess it's bad boys being bad boys. I have zero clue who are the people chasing Fredette and the wizard and why, or where this magic staff came from, or how it allows the wizard to conjure a sandstorm. Nothing remotely as interesting as the dynamics in the movies. Here, it just kind of is what it is. In TV especially, you have to be able to mine conflict from personal motivations. The king's brother causes trouble because it's the only way he can get the king's attention. The king's brother humiliates the king's advisor's family because he hates the advisor for being closer with the king than him. The king's advisor makes his daughter sleep with the king to secure their status, which means that the hero's best friend is now her stepmom? Very entertaining personal drama. And look what happened when it was replaced by a simple war of two sides.
What a waste, yeah.
Without universally enjoyable personal drama, most audiences who aren't already into your show's fantasy elements will have a much harder time enjoying it. The third core fantasy problem here is that the story follows fantasy logic more than basic human logic, which for basic human audiences can feel really dumb. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of individual examples of this. Sauron releases an ice age when he dies for some reason. Sauron turns into venom for some reason. The rings are super powerful for some reason.
Perfection.
Well, what reason? What do the rings do? What makes them special? They can make trees bloom and attract fish.
You serious?
But that being said, I'll admit that alone, this point is kind of nitpicky. Just because I don't know as much about this fantasy world as others, it doesn't mean that the world is dumb. The fantasy genre includes fantastical elements that are not real, so maybe the real problem is me, not knowing those things or keeping enough of an open mind for them. Fair enough. Well, I mean...
No, great job.
But at the same time, this logic problem becomes universally problematic when a fantasy show starts to use its own made-up fantasy rules and elements to keep the story moving. For instance, there's this idea that the elves must leave Middle-earth when this elf tree drops its last leaf.
The last gold leaf will fall, and the elves must abandon these shores forever.
And then the rings make the tree blossom and allow the elves to stay so that the story can continue to the next step.
Invade Mordor from the west.
And it's like, why? Why must the elves leave Middle-earth when this tree dies? Is it a religious thing, or do they literally need the tree to survive? What even is the tree? And why do the rings make it blossom? How can an ornament made from a special metal control trees? Like, we're past simple nitpicking by now. The story is literally dependent on things that it itself invents without proper explanation. Same with the whole mission against Sauron. The idea is that the heroes must use the power of the rings to stop Sauron, because in Sauron's hand, a ring of that power will be terrible.
In Sauron's hands, they could work an evil beyond reckoning, dominating the mind.
But aside from making its carrier have scary visions, which other characters have anyway, even without a ring, all we've seen the rings do is control trees and animals. And it's like, wait a minute, we've already seen Sauron control animals without a ring. The sea serpent avoids them. And even the monster dog obeys his commands. So then what's the big deal over not letting Sauron get the rings in his hand? What's he gonna do with them? Control animals a bit more? Like, the show expects you to view these rings as a big deal just because
They're the rings in Lord of the Rings.
Same with Fredette's journey. There's this idea that they're lost in the desert, going around in circles, until they realize that an old Frodo people song is actually a map through the desert.
Warning, not to forget the words to the song or you'll just go round in circles.
The walking song.
I think it's some kind of directions.
Past eyes of pale fire. Black sand for my bed.
And again, it's like, what are you on about? We don't even know where they're going, so how can there suddenly be a folklore song to lead them there? And how can they be going in circles in the first place when they're in a desert with mountains and stars to guide them? Literally, just keep the big mountain on one side and it's impossible to go in circles. But that's what happens because it needs to. The story introduces a fake problem so that it can offer a made-up solution, which feels dumb.
There must be some evil upon this land, fusing our path.
I understand that a lot of people will still think I'm nitpicking, and that's fair.
Good, keep going.
I'll take some responsibility for not knowing enough. I thought Sauron was 10 feet tall, and I'm sure there's an answer for why now he's not. But my point is that it would be nice for the story to develop some of those answers instead of relying on their existence elsewhere.
He's quite the character in the Silmarillion. His bit in Barain and Luthien was a very detailed story.
You serious?
He's a shapeshifter who goes from wolf to snake.
No matter how fantastical the world of House of the Dragon got, everything was still driven by realistic and fully understandable human logic. There wasn't stuff where an evil cloud attacked a tree in Elfland and then both sides sailed into Middle-earth to wage war, after which the evil inexplicably disappeared. That's dumb. At this point, I feel like the more I say, the less friends I'll make. And I, Movimento, don't care, by the way. So I'll just say this. Rings of Power is an insanely good-looking show, with a very fascinating world full of potential. But unless the show starts to offer a more human way to experience the world, it cannot stand on its own feet. The biggest, and perhaps the only reason for most people to watch it, will be its title. And at least for now, that's not good enough for either of us to keep watching.
Still better than House of the Dragon Season 2 though.